spell work, Trey went to the batting cages to practice hitting. He rented a helmet for $4 and he paid 75 cents for each group of 20 pitches. If he spent a total of $7 at the batting cages, how many groups of pitches did he pay for? If you look at this equation, he's paying two separate amounts. One is $4 and one is 75 cents. Which one is changing based on how many games or pitches he gets? 75 cents. So 75 cents is the one that's going to have our variable. You can choose any variable. We're adding $4, and what's the total amount of money that he has to spend? $7. So we have 0.75x plus 4 equals 7. This gives us a two-step equation. We want to solve two-step equations by using reverse order of operations. So what would we have to do to both sides?
Subtract 4.
Yeah, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. We get that 0.75x equals 7 minus 4, which is 3. Our last step, when you have a decimal coefficient, you divide by that coefficient. So we're dividing both sides by 0.75. And x equals 4. So Trey had enough money to buy 4 groups of pitches. We're in lesson 3 of our guided notes. The heading for the notes is equations with variables on both sides. Our targets are, I will be able to use properties of equality to write equivalent equations and solve equations with variables on both sides. When you have equations on both sides, some equations like 8 plus 4d equals 5d have variables on each side of the equal sign. To solve, you use the property of equality to write an equivalent equation where there's only variables on one side of the equal sign, and then you solve like you would solve a two-step equation. So on your notes, for equations with variables on both sides, your property of equality means when you're solving equations, you need to remember that whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other side to keep the equation equivalent or equal. You're going to look at your equation and determine which variable would be easiest to get rid of, and then add or subtract it from each side. So if you have a variable that's already on its own side of the equal sign, I would get rid of the variable on the opposite side of the equal sign because it'll leave you with one less step. If you have your equation and there's variables on both sides and they're both positive, usually you're going to get rid of the smaller number. If you have two negatives, you want to get rid of the bigger negative. So make sure you fill this into your notes. Okay, if we look at the first example, number 1, solve 8 plus 4d equals 5d and check your solution. If we split our equal sign for 8 plus 4d and 5d, on the left-hand side we have a constant and our variable. On the right-hand side we just have a term with a variable. Which one would be easiest to get rid of? A term with a variable. If we moved 5d to the left-hand side, we would have nothing left on the right-hand side. So we want to get rid of 4d. The opposite of adding 4d is subtracting 4d.
Wait, why aren't you trying to subtract 8?
Because we're going to leave 8 on its own side of the equal sign. We want to rewrite with the properties of equality so that we only have a term with a variable on one side. If we have 5d and we subtract 4d, what are we left with? 1d. What is 1d equivalent to? D. So we're left with d equals 8. You can always check your solution by plugging your solution back into the equation. So I have the equation 8 plus 4. Instead of d, what value do we plug in? 8. And then that's supposed to equal 5d. Instead of d, we're plugging in 8. I'm gonna bring down my 8. What is 4 times 8? 32. And what is 5 times 8? 40. We can simplify the left-hand side. 8 plus 32 gives us 40. Does 40 equal 40? Yes, so we know we got the answer correct. If at the end you did not get the same answer on both sides, you should go back and check your equation because you did not come up with the correct answer. For number 2, we have the equation 6n minus 1 equals 4n minus 5. When I split my equal sign, I'm looking at both of my terms with the variable 6n and 4n. Which one would be easiest to get rid of? 4n. It's our smaller number of the two. So I'm going to subtract 4n from both sides. What is 6n minus 4n? 2n. I have to bring down my minus 1. And that's going to equal, what do we have left on our right-hand side? A negative 5. Remember that's the subtraction sign goes to the the operation is our sign of our constant. And now this looks like a two-step equation, which is what we went over yesterday. Two-step equations we solve using reverse order of operations. So what do we want to do first? Add 1 to both sides. We'll be left with 2n. If we have a negative 5 and we add 1, negative 4. And our last step brings us onto a one-step equation. 2n equals negative 4. We have to do what to both sides? Divide by 2. This cancels and we're left with n equals negative 4. Yep, negative 2. N equals negative 2. Okay, our next question is a word problem. Green's Gym charges a one-time fee of $50 plus $30 per session for a personal trainer. A new fitness center charges a yearly fee of $250 plus $10 for each session with a personal trainer. For how many sessions is the cost of the two plans the same? If we want to find out when the cost is the same, what are we going to do to both of those prices? If we want to know when they're the same, we want to know when they are equal. So, if we look at Green's Gym, it charges a $50 fee plus $30 per session. What would our equation for Green's Gym be? Yeah, 30x, because that's the amount for your personal trainer, and it's an additional $50 for a one-time fee. On the right-hand side, we're going to do the new fitness center, and that's $250 plus $10 for each session. So right here, it tells us $250 plus, and how much is it for each session? $10, and since that's changing, we're going to use our variable. So we get the equation 30x plus 50 equals 250 plus 10x, and it's an equation with variables on both sides. 30x and 10x, which term with our variable would be easiest to get rid of?
10x.
10x, so we're going to subtract 10x from both sides. 30x minus 10x gives us 20x, and I bring down my plus 50, and that equals 250. Here is our two-step equation. We want to undo any addition or subtraction first, so we have to get rid of plus 50. How do we get rid of plus 50?
Subtract 50.
Subtract 50. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. This will cancel, and we get that 20x equals 200. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient, which is 20. and we get that x equals
10.
10. So if you paid for 10 personal training sessions, no matter which gym you went to, it would be the same price. That is when the gym memberships are equal. When you have equations with rational coefficients, when you're working with fractions, remember, what do we need before we add or subtract with fractions? Common denominator. So if you're adding and subtracting with fractions, you need to make sure that you find a common denominator. For number 4, we have 2/3 x minus 1 equals 9 minus 1/6 x. So our terms with the variable have fractions. What would be a common denominator between 3 and 6? 6. So we're going to change 2/3 to a fraction over 6. From 3 to 2, what are we multiplying by? Or from 3 to 6, what are we multiplying by? 2. We have to do the same thing to the numerator, and 2 times 2 is 4. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. 4/6x minus 1 equals 9 minus 1/6 x. Okay, if you look at your terms with the variable, which one would be easiest to get rid of? A positive 4/6x or a negative 1/6 x?
Negative 1/6.
Yeah, how do we undo a minus 1/6? Add. We're going to add 1/6 x to both sides. And what is 4/6 plus 1/6? 5/6 x, and we're subtracting 1, and that equals 9. Just like what we went over yesterday, we have a two-step equation. Want to undo any addition or subtraction? And what do we have to do to both sides? Add 1. We have 5/6 x equals 10. And our from lesson 1, anytime you have a fraction as your coefficient, how do you get x by itself?
You have to
We multiply by the reciprocal. What is the reciprocal of 5/6?
6.
6 over 5, and I have to do that to both sides. Anytime you multiply a fraction by its reciprocal, it equals 1. 1 times x leaves you with x. If we have 10, that's a whole number, how do we write it as a fraction? Over 1. We multiply our numerators. 10 times 6 is 60. Multiply our denominators. 1 times 5 is 5. What is 60 over 5 simplified to? Or 60 divided by 5?
12.
12. So we get that x equals 12. So go ahead and finish the